if we can flatten mortality risk, can we optimize health and potentially lifespan? So let's take a look at what I mean by that. In this plot, on the y-axis, we've got the death rate plotted against age on the x, starting from birth through people who are older than 95 years old. And what we can see is that the death rate in newborns up until 1 year old is very high. And then death rates decline, such that the lowest risk of death for all causes is when we're 10 to 14 years old. But then afterwards, death rates close to linearly increase, as shown by the red arrows, as we age. Now, instead of having that age-related increase for the mortality rate, what if we could flatten it such that it doesn't linearly increase for every year that we're alive after 14 years old? So then the question is, how can we do that? Well, aging and disease are biochemical processes that happen over many decades. They don't just happen out of nowhere. And apologies if you've heard this a billion times, but this is the central premise of the channel and how I think that we can flatten the mortality risk or flatten mortality risk and potentially optimize health and lifespan. So with that in mind, if we track and optimize towards youth, optimize biomarkers towards youth, and push them towards lowest risk of death for all causes, whether it's by using exercise, diet, supplements, etc. So if we track and optimize well-established biomarkers of organ and systemic health, can we slow aging and minimize disease risk with the goal of maximizing longevity? So with that in mind, in late July, I blood tested for the 5th time in 2024, and note that this is blood test number 53 times since 2015. So with that in mind, what's my biological age? And we can see that data here. This is using Dr. Morgan Levine's phenotypic age calculator, which is a metric of biological age. And if you have blood test data and you want to measure your own biological age using this test, there'll be a downloadable Excel link in the video's description. So when I enter the 9 biomarkers as shown here, I get a biological age of 33.9 years, which is 17.6 years younger than my chronological. Now, rather than just looking at data into a spreadsheet, I'll have screenshots of the lab test report coming up in just a bit. But it's important to note that this is just one test. We shouldn't get too high or too low over one test, but tracking year-to-year changes, I think, is more important for being able to flatten that mortality risk, flatten that baseline in terms of mortality risk. So with that in mind, let's have a look at biological age results since 2018, as I have 34 tests over that 6+ year period, as shown here. Now, when I first started tracking in 2018 to 2019, over 3 tests, average biological age using Levine's PhenoAge was 36.1 years. But 3 tests over a 2-year span may not be representative of year-to-year changes, so I started testing more often. 6 times each in 2020 and 2021, so 12 tests over that 2-year period, with an average biological age using this test of 35.6 years. So that's probably closer to my true year-to-year average relative to the 2018 to 2019 data. And then I had my best year to date in 2022, over 7 tests, with an average biological age of 33.8 years. It got a bit worse to 34.7 years in 2023, but still better than 2020 and 2021 data. And thus far, after the first 5 tests in 2024, I'm back to my best data at 33.8 years. So what we can see from these 34 tests is that I've potentially slowed biological age. I would never say that I've reversed it. This is the live long enough to live forever approach, and I can't undo the first 51 years of living where who knows what my biological age and what these biomarkers look like prior to 2015, even though I do have some sporadic data. But I can only control what I can going forward. So the goal is to have as many biomarkers close to youth and what's associated with lowest risk of death for all causes for the next 70+ years, or as long as my genetic lifespan will allow. So, all right, let's jump into the blood test data, because I don't just focus on these 9 biomarkers. There are some other highlights, and also there is room for improvement. And that's what we'll see here. Now, what I first want to highlight is that I've been using Quest for many tests. And one reason for that is you can see that I blood tested in the morning, 7:16 in the morning is when the blood was drawn, and results were available within 24 hours, which to me is just fantastic. Just going to my doctor in the past, the results take probably about a week, which is just too slow. Now, to do that, I haven't been going through my doctor, but as I mentioned in the last video on lead, I've been using Ulta Lab Tests, ultalabtest.com, and I've got an affiliate link there if you want to help support the channel. So basically, I go to ultalabtest.com and I order all the tests that I want. I bring them to Quest, pay the $10 blood draw fee, and then, as I mentioned, I got results, all of the results that I've shown here within 24 hours. Some results do take longer. Like I measured Candida antibodies, that took about a week. Homocysteine took about 2 or 3 days, somewhere in that ballpark. But for the standard chem panel and CBC, 1 business day, which is fantastic in my eyes. All right, so some highlights. HDL, 54 milligrams per deciliter, is now in the optimal range, 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter. I covered that in an earlier video. If you missed it, it'll be in the right corner. Now, HDL is now greater than 50 for 10 tests in a row, with an average over that 10 test period of 55 milligrams per deciliter. For comparison, for the 43 tests since 2015, prior to those 10 tests, HDL average was 44.7 milligrams per deciliter. And when using a 2-sample t-test to compare those 2 groups of data, I've significantly improved it over the past 10 tests. Also note that HS, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, is again less than 0.3 milligrams per liter, which is below is their limit of detection. So that's the 18th consecutive test where I've had HSCRP less than 0.3 milligrams per liter. And it looks like Quest has actually made an improvement in reducing the limit of detection from 0.3 to 0.2, which let's see if I can keep it below 0.2 going forward. Also, glucose, which was 98 on the high side for my last test, blood test number 4, returned to close to my average at 88 milligrams per deciliter. Now, what was behind that? I can't say with much certainty, but I did make a couple of changes that may have made an impact. I removed branch chain amino acid supplementation, so I supplemented with 5 grams per day prior to the last test. So for this test, I removed that. And then I also reduced fat intake from an average of 93 to 83 grams per day. So why I think those 2 factors may be involved in the glucose reduction going from 98 back to 88 is because a relatively higher protein intake and fat intake in my correlation, so that 50 plus blood test data since 2015, that's significantly correlated with higher glucose in my data. So cutting protein, the branch chain amino acids, and cutting fat intake may be part of the reason why I was able to bring glucose back to 88 from 98 from the past test. All right, on to page 2. So additional highlights, eGFR, which is a measure of kidney function. In this case, it's derived from creatinine levels, are 106, eGFR at 106. So that's 20 years younger than expected based on my chronological age. And we can see that why that's true here. On the y-axis, we've got the GFR estimate, so eGFR, plotted against age. And we can see that in this study of about 386,000 people, an eGFR of 106 would be the average value for someone around 30 years old, whereas someone of my chronological age, 51 years, has an average value of around 70. So that's about a 20-year better than expected eGFR based on chronological age. Now, the other side of that story is that creatinine levels are proportional to muscle mass. My workout performance in terms of strength and everything else hasn't changed dramatically over the past few months. No obvious major differences in terms of that. So I find it hard to believe that a reduction in creatinine would be because of a reduction in muscle mass. Body weight is the same too, and no change in workout frequency, duration, intensity, or any of that. Also note albumin at 5 is on the high side of the range, which is good news because albumin levels decline during aging, and relatively lower levels of albumin are associated with an increased all-cause mortality risk. All right, so now for some potential weak spots and room for improvement. So the liver enzymes, AST and ALT at 26 aren't terrible. I've had higher values than that in the past. But lowest risk of death for all causes for those 2 liver enzymes is closer to the low 20s. So I've got some room for improvement to bring those down. Thyroid hormones, free T4 and free T3. I'm trying to increase free T3 and reduce free T4. In other words, improve the conversion of free T4 into free T3 as that conversion worsens with aging. So to do that for this test, I averaged 404 milligrams of selenium per day. So there was 59 days in between blood tests. So selenium intake for that 59-day period was an average of 404 milligrams per day. And I did that almost exclusively by increasing Brazil nut intake. Now, I didn't measure plasma levels of selenium to see if I was able to increase selenium in blood. via an increase in dietary intake. So that could be something that I look at in the future, but I'm pretty confident that what's in the Brazil nuts should represent a higher blood level of selenium. So with that in mind, I've got to come up with a different approach other than increasing selenium, which is a required cofactor for conversion of T4 to T3, which is why I did that increasing selenium experiment to potentially increase the conversion of T4 to T3. So I've got to come up with a different approach to try to improve or increase free T3 while reducing free T4. MCV, which is the average red blood cell volume. So do you have very large red blood cells or very small red blood cells? The MCV increases during aging. 94.2 is on the high side of my data over the past 50 plus tests, and that's going in the wrong direction. And I have some ideas based on correlations of my data, which I post on Patreon, for why that may be the case. So that may be the focus of a future video. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And then lymphocytes. So 1547 is better than my past 2 tests, which have been on the low side. But my past 3 tests for lymphocytes have been relatively low, including this test with a 3-test average of 1443. For comparison, for the previous 47 tests since 2015, average lymphocytes were 1902, and values for lymphocytes around 2000 is the average value for someone in their early 20s, and values of around 2000 for lymphocytes is associated with lowest risk of death for all causes. And if you missed that data, it'll be in the video in the right corner. So I've got some work to do to figure out why my lymphocytes have declined and what I can do to bring them back to closer to 1900 and even better, around 2000. Now, what I haven't gotten into yet is what diet composition and supplements correspond to these data. And I started working on that video. It'll be ready for YouTube next week. All right, that's all for now. If you're interested in more about my attempts to biohack aging, check us out on Patreon, where I offer blood test consults. And before you go, we've got a whole bunch of discount links that you may be interested in, including discount links for epigenetic testing, NAD quantification, oral microbiome composition, at-home metabolomics, at-home blood testing with Cyfox Health, which includes ApoB, but also GrimAge, green tea, diet tracking with Chronometer, or if you'd like to support the channel, you can do that with the website Buy Me a Coffee. We've also got merch, so if you're interested in wearing the ConquerAging or Diet Trying brand, as I've got on here, that link and all of the other links will be in the video's description. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.